Hi, everybody. My name is Miles. I'm a disability inclusion partner with Peak Performers. I want to welcome you back to Disability Weekly. So sorry for being a couple of minutes late right here. We were having a couple of audio issues. That's on me. So I do want to welcome Yolanda to the show today. And we should have a really fun spirited debate talking about the importance of governance versus cultural inclusion when it comes to actually advancing meaningful change towards disability inclusion and support within the workplace. I'm really excited today for the conversation, especially because we're going to be getting two very different, unique points of view. Real quickly, though, do take a second to introduce yourself into the chat. Me and Yolanda can both see it. We'll both connect with you, but also I encourage you to connect with the other people as well. And I'm going to pose the question to the audience. If you're joining us right now, answer the question, what matters more when it comes to actually advancing meaningful change around the areas of disability inclusion and disability support within the workplace? Does it matter more to have governance, or does it matter more to have cultural seismic changes within the workplace? I look forward to hearing what you have to say. But this is such a timely conversation because we recently celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And many advocates within our space feel frustrated right now. They feel frustrated that we're having the same kinds of conversations and we're having the same kinds of fights around advocacy that we were ever since the ADA first passed. So this is going to be an interesting conversation. Yolanda, welcome to the show.
Okay. Hi, Miles. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, thank you for coming. And again, I apologize for the mic issues, but real quick, introduce yourself and what is NWAF?
Well, if I can go into it, my name is Yolanda Pemberton. I am the founder of the National Workplace Adjustments Framework, NWAF. Whether it's you and me here today, Miles, or a few others listening quietly in the background, my lane stays the same. I speak to governance, architecture. I don't speak from lived experience, personal story, or advocacy. I explain the system. And just to be clear from the outset, I'm not here to call for more laws or stricter oversight. I'm here to talk about the structures that make compliance predictable, so people don't have to rely on lived experience to survive the workplace. That is the gap NWAF was built to close. The gap between cultural intention and evidentiary obligation, where organizations must now be able to prove that their systems are lawful, consistent, and reconstructible.
I love that. Thank you, Yolanda. I appreciate the introduction as well, too. So this brings up such an interesting conversation because many advocates within this space exist around the area of culture, and culture has, by default, always been a compromise. Because for the record, I agree with you. I think that if we had more structure, if we had more guidance and governance in place with a lot of these kind of situations, it wouldn't be so much of a reoccurring issue. However, I think that oftentimes culture exists within the space of compromise. And I'll give you an example. So generally, when I am showing up to the workplace, every once in a while, my hearing aids will not charge overnight. This happens usually about like once a month or so, typically because I charge them late at night. Sometimes they don't seat right, or sometimes I just forget to. And in the meantime, when I show up to work in those situations, I'll usually narrate as to exactly why I am maybe speaking a little bit louder, or maybe that I can't hear you quite correctly. But I'm adapting myself, and I'm oftentimes narrating the particular struggles that I'm facing that day. Many people don't feel comfortable doing that. Like they just kind of suffer in silence. And oftentimes they may just be perceived as different or off that day. And it's difficult, right? Like, because a lot of times what we do is I've adapted this as a way of adapting to the workplace so that people don't perceive me as aloof, or people don't perceive me as disinterested, or any other kind of like negative stigma. But realistically, I think that we could develop a workplace where it's accepted and supported that people don't have to do that. Is that right?
Yes, it is. I was going to leave it until further on, but I want to talk about, for example, a neurodiversity tribunal case in the UK, where an autistic professional's persistence So it was a disability related need for clarity was misinterpreted as difficulty. So instead of adjusting the process, the organization escalated the person. Concerns were reframed as conduct, and communication differences were treated as defiance. So by the time the situation reached HR, the evidentiary landscape had already collapsed. That was not a cultural issue, it was a governance failure. Nothing in that case was unpredictable. There was no audit trail, no governed route for raising concerns, no mechanism for distinguishing distress from difficulty, no adjustments to the process, and no architecture capable of holding the facts at the point of impact. And this is exactly where NWAF sits. It replaces discretion with structure. It creates a governed pathway for communication escalation, evidence capture, and decision making. So persistence isn't misread as misconduct, and distress isn't reframed as difficulty. With NWF in place, the system would have produced the evidence, clarity, and procedural integrity that were missing. The escalation would simply wouldn't have occurred.
Very well put. And I think that neurodiversity is such a poignant example for many people in the audience. Many of them have spent their careers working with neurodiversity and with neurodiverse individuals across the autism spectrum, but also various different other cognitive differences. And there's a particular word that I hate within the hiring space, and that is culture fit, because I feel like culture fit is so often used to exclude people who are different than us in some way. They are different than us. We can't quite exactly articulate why, or maybe we don't feel comfortable saying exactly why, but we use culture fit as a bit of a blanket statement in order to exclude people that are not a fit. And when it comes to autism, it's estimated that people with observable autism, so in other words, they interact within the workplace in some way that is different than the average bear, and they might be perceived as, pardon the phrase, weird, right? There's all kinds of different interactions that may take place, and it's estimated that among these individuals that they see an 80% turnover rate within the first year after they finally do get a job. And this is after finally navigating many barriers to ever getting a job in the first place. So I guess like narrowing down specifically around autism and neurodiversity and any other kind of cognitive difference that a person may experience, how do we even begin to tackle the giant issue of culture and trying to make sure that we attach more rules to it so that we can support individuals even if they express themselves differently or show up differently?
Well, in a recent post, Belinda Sampson highlighted a job advert requiring a valid driver's license, 100% healthy, and good communication skills. The things you're talking about. These are not inclusion issues or language mistakes. The advert alone is a governance failure because job adverts are not cultural artifacts. They are governance documents that set out the legal boundary of who is permitted to apply. When unlawful or exclusionary criteria appear in a job advert, it is not a reflection of bias in an individual manager. It is evidence of an organization without a governed recruitment pathway. So NWF replaces that discretionary space with evidentiary controls that prevent exclusionary criteria from entering the system, ensuring recruitment processes meet statutory thresholds and remain defensible under scrutiny.
Awesome. And by the way, welcome to Sienna, welcome to Susan for joining us live. It's good to see both of y'all here, so thank you for joining us. Please do chime in with your thoughts around this as well. And you keep coming back to one particular phrase, and that is discretionary. And I think that that's such an important thing to highlight because a lot of times you quit a job not because of the job itself, but you quit the job because of your boss. And I know that I personally have experienced that where, in fact, within the recruiting space, we even have a joke about that, where you don't quit your job, you quit your boss. And a lot of times that comes down to how you are or not are not supported and how, and how you are or are not included and accepted within the workplace as well. And a lot of times those challenges that come up is inclusion advocates like me may come in and change hearts and get people to act in a more inclusive way. But you would argue that that person moves on, they change organizations, and then there might not be, the next person behind them may not have the same level of empathy and support, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's why it's structural. I'm going to refer to yourself. So on the 27th of April, Miles, on your live, you highlighted employees feeling they must prove their disability,
Yeah.
defend their need for adjustments, and navigate opaque, judgment-laden processes. These are not cultural flaws, again, or interpersonal misunderstandings. They are the predictable outcomes of systems that rely on individual discretion instead of governed pathways. That is what happens when adjustments depend on who you get, what they know, how confident they feel, or how much risk they believe they carry. When discretion becomes the operating model, variability becomes the outcome. And variability is a governance failure, not a cultural one. So NWF replaces that discretionary space with an evidentiary system-led pathway that meets the emerging 2024-27 compliance standards. It provides a predictable, auditable route that removes reliance on individual judgment and aligns organizational practice with statutory duty.
Thank you. It's all about kind of like removing that layers and adding a little bit more structure to the entire organization. So
It's upstream, Miles. It's upstream. I have listened to many of your lives, and I have examples from all walks of life of your audience, and I have the answer to each and every one. And we cannot, we've done it for decades. Nobody, whether you have a disability or not, should rely or on a Sunday evening thinking, I have to take that burden. I have to go in and I have to mask. I have to pretend. I have to put on that professionalism. Or if you haven't got a disability or you need adjustments, I hope he or she's not in tomorrow. It should not be left down to an individual to decide. It should be in the structure. And the way that compliance is going now, Australia, the EU, the UK, USA, companies are going to have to be able to defend what they have in place. It's no longer we trained the person, we talked to them about that a couple of years ago, or we have a poster in the tea room. That's no longer going to be acceptable. If you cannot prove that it's in the structure, you cannot prove that the manager knew. Structure means everybody along the way is accountable. If you have assessments, you're promoted, you leave your job, you have a new manager that comes in that says, Miles, I understand your headset's not working, so you can work from home on such and such because they take a long time to charge. We'll see you on Tuesday, you can work from home. A new manager comes in and says, where's Miles? Oh, Miles doesn't work on Monday. Why not? So that's what the passport, the workplace passport that goes with you. It's there. Your chair is there. Your headphones is there. At 4 o'clock, Miles, you've got your meeting room for peace and quiet, because at that time in the open plan office, it gets loud, it gets noisy. It's in the structure. You were speaking to one of your guests and they were talking about how uncomfortable you were talking about a manager that looked after you. And then your guest referred to, if you were to disclose your disability, we do have to remember that the manager or HR, they may need a minute to take it all in. when it's governed and it's structure, it's clear. It's clear what happens when Miles says it's there. It's in the structure. Manager doesn't have to feel awkward. You don't have to worry about the thing's going to change if I actually divulge it. You need equipment, but you're doing the balancing. It shouldn't fall on you. It should be in the structure. So everybody knows what they're doing as and when.
Again, I agree with a lot of what you're saying in that there is an innate need in here. At many of the guests that are joining us on the podcast right now, know that I design hobby board games and that I spend a lot of time writing rules. And I spend a lot of time writing rules where there can be no misinterpretation and it's clear to everybody about exactly what happens and when. And I oftentimes lament that the real world isn't like a board game and that there is not more structure that is attached to it and that there's automatically gray area. And here's a recent example. There is, many people might be surprised to know that the ADA doesn't necessarily apply to people when they are flying on the airplane. That doesn't mean that the airlines can charge you a higher price for necessarily like checking your wheelchair, for example. But what it does mean is that it's governed by a different set of rules. It actually has a different law that's in place that was passed by the airline successfully lobbying for an exemption. But what this also means is that if, say, for example, you are bigger in size due to a disability or health condition, and you need to occupy 2 seats to be able to comfortably fit in the aircraft, you're going to have to pay for both of those seats. Whereas normally there would be certain rules and restrictions that would be charging people more due to the nature of their disability. And I think that if you drill into any one of these kinds of things, there oftentimes is exceptions, there's gray areas, and particularly I would kind of highlight when you look at the accommodations process, we oftentimes fall back to what is, quote, reasonable. And reasonable to me is a big gray area. Like what does that even mean? Who decides what is reasonable? And to be honest with you, usually the reasonableness of it is something that is evaluated by the employer. So how would you even begin to tackle gray areas like that, where we have exceptions, where we have cases like reasonableness?
I have recently done a complete governance art on that basis. And I talked about that word reasonable.
Yeah.
It is what you call a gray area. But I look at it more in depth than that. With the changes across the world, it's a very high risk area. That's why interpretations can't be subjective. It's got to be in the structure as to what that word means. It comes up in tribunal cases, as you say. It comes up in travel. It comes up in what an employer is deemed reasonable for you to ask for them to provide, depending upon. But Miles, it's all changing. It's all changing. The decades of what we inherited is no more. Across the world, even to trade in the EU, even statutes in the law in the USA, and most certainly we have agencies now that will come in, and it's no longer what people will term as a slap on the wrist. It really is no longer beneficial to say, I did what was reasonable, or we did our best, or that was down to so-and-so. That's gone. Well, in the UK, it's gone since April.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Okay.
And we can look at, NWF obviously has to look at the lived experiences, but every answer, and it must be that way because of the interests that NWAF has had worldwide. Worldwide. It's the same gaps wherever you are in the world. You just got to close it. We cannot realistically allow the next generation to inherit what we have and done nothing about it.
And I agree. I remember being struck by the interview that I did with Matthew Shapiro a couple of months back, and how he's been in the advocacy space for a long time. He's a wheelchair user based out of DC. And he described to me his frustration with just how it feels like we're fighting the same fight over and over and over again, and we haven't made any progress from the ADA. And it's important to point out, too, that the ADA is relatively new legislation. My understanding is that disability protections within the UK are relatively new legislation when you look at the entire history of the country. Like, this is new legislation, and we're still kind of in the infantile steps right here. But before we go on, I did want to give a shout out to Susan right here. Susan says, do you feel that a driver's license requirement could be a reasonable accommodation for someone with epilepsy, neurodiversity, anxiety, etc.? And Susan, great question. I think that it comes back to that question of reasonableness. The answer I would give is that it depends on the core requirements of the job, the essential functions of the job.
Absolutely.
And I think, are you kind of on the same page as me with that, Yolanda?
Yes, I'm on the same page with you.
Yeah.
But the advert that I referred to earlier on, that was not appropriate.
Okay.
That was not appropriate. Structure includes no eye contact. It should be in the structure. We had a law, I think, in the UK where in certain areas, if you were disabled, you kind of went through the process. That's all good. That you get through the process at least to an interviewing stage. But it's clear now with the new laws that are in, that's not enough. We need to be able, it should be in the structure so that if an interviewee does not make eye contact, takes a long time to answer, pauses, needs a room earlier on to collect their thoughts, needs the questions up front, it should be in the structure, not up to the interviewer.
Yeah.
Not up to, not just so they can say, Yolanda or Miles, they turned up, we've done our bit, tick that box. The laws are changing. You really have to be able to defend this. It's not only going to help a neurodivergent applicant. It's going to reduce the backlogs in tribunals and court cases. You do see that. You do see that if the structure's in place, that tribunals are no longer going to look and say, well, and this game of playing of, well, they did, and she was only, or he was only told, or occupational health said, that's gone, Miles. That's gone. There is a structure to follow. And the reason is because it's not changing. With all the goodwill in the world, it's not changing. And governments and advocates for disability all over the world have realized it. And how I know that is because the structure and the architecture of when I created it, it just made sense to me.
Sure.
It's trademarked. It makes sense to me, but I didn't think it was going to make sense to everybody. It was just made sense to me that it was applicable across all accessibility, everything.
And I wanted to ask too around structure, because sometimes structure is used in a ill-intentioned effort. So I'll give you an example. I did an interview a while back with a woman who described to me the process, how there was a structure in place for her requesting a reasonable accommodation. And the reasonable accommodation was literally having a $20 laptop stand that was available that she could set her laptop on, so that and that worked well for her particular physical limitations that she experienced. And this took months to approve, and this took multiple doctors' notes for a $20 stand. And sometimes what happens, where many within the states, is that there will be so much of a focus around structure that, you are required for this medical verification in order to get support. And the compliance people get solely focused on that, and they lose track of the person there. Or the employer may even kind of maliciously use the structure in a way to be able to deny support for individuals. So how do we ensure that structure is not used to work against the people it's meant to serve?
If NWF's structure, governance, architecture is to protect the employer and the employee, it's to reduce backlogs, it's to prevent tribunal cases, it's to prevent HR, who's working in the government sector, not knowing the law and saying, okay, Miles, you need that stand. It's not the cost, it's just there's a process to go through. And she says to you, but the people you need to go through is access to work. Let's use the UK. And you say, okay. And she says to you, but Miles, just because we're HR, we're not able to instigate that. It's for you to go to access to work and instigate it. They will give you a unique reference number. You come back, and then they will do assess you. They will help the company if the company needs it. Even if they don't, they will help, etc., etc. But here's the thing, Miles. That was the wrong information. In the UK, if you work for the government or you work for the Crown, your adjustments are automatic.
Okay.
You're in that lane. It's automatic. But HR didn't know that.
And I guess where I get frustrated too is that I will get frustrated with the structure because I know what it is, and I know how it can work against people. So here in the States, for example, we have a lot of structure around social security benefits for those who cannot work due to the nature of their disability. But oftentimes there is two different ways. One, you can kill the law, right? Like that, but that actually happens rarely. As we're experiencing right now, they're just cutting funding, so there's less people that are available to actually handle it. So there's multiple different ways that you can choose to not support people, and they're just choosing the latter of underfunding it. And in addition to applying multiple different layers of red tape that people have to go through. And I myself have experienced this. To be able to get my hearing aids, I get them through what's called vocational rehabilitation. And I'm very grateful because they would normally cost $6,000 and they cost $0 out of pocket for me. However, it takes a 6 months process for me of dogging them to be able to get the access to the hearing aids that I need, including pay stubs, including extensive medical documentation. I even have to go see an ear, nose, and throat doctor every time so that they can look inside my ear and look at my audiogram and say, yes, Miles still has hearing loss. So I feel like sometimes the structure is bent in a way that actually works against the people that it's meant to serve.
Well, the same architecture, it's cross-disability architecture. The same architecture appears across disability in accessibility, adjustments, benefits, employment, digital access, and public services. The patterns repeat because the governance gap repeats.
Okay.
When systems are not engineered, the same failures surface in different forms across every sector. Digital accessibility is not failing because people don't care. It's failing because systems rely on delay, discretion, and inconsistent compliance. When compliance is optional, exclusion becomes predictable.
And I think
In governance terms, optionality is a structural risk. And structural risk always produces structural harm.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. I wanted to jump in with accessibility, though, because I recently was talking with Jack Mullaney, who is a longtime accessibility expert, and we were talking about how the federal government has chosen to delay compliance requirements for the latest version of accessibility, and how frustrated and upset he was with this. So sometimes there might be structure, but then the higher ups that are in power choose to delay things, and this therefore kicks the can down the road as far as compliance goes. And I think from a larger cultural standpoint, there is so much fear around the removals of diversity, equity, and inclusion that have happened within corporations in the United States that many people feel like they're like the culture is so adverse, and the people that would be in charge of applying structure and creating structure are reluctant to ever apply something like this. So how do we strategically be able to layer in more structure within our organizations, especially when there's hostile environments?
Because NWF already contains the infrastructure people have been asking for. So the passport, the audit trail, the accountability chain, the national pathway, the removal of subjective bias, the end of shadow policies, the vicarious liability model, the governance architecture, and the statutory compliance backbone. NWF is not a toolkit. It's a governance system engineered for evidentiary compliance.
Yeah.
The law are changing, Miles.
Yeah.
NWF changed with it.
Okay.
The old structures were never built for this new compliance that's coming in. And I hear it, and I still feel that we are back there, that because we've lived it for so long, there is no hope for change. But you have to also remember countries, governments, etc., are tired of paying out. A 60-week delay for a SEND child to even be assessed. You know, these are the topics that I've covered in my posts, as you know, and it was really great when the Department of Education came back to me on one of my white papers, and it's going to be incorporated into the changes. The NWF structure is going to be incorporated into the changes that are now going to be made for neurodiversity.
That's so exciting.
That I was going to wait until the end.
That's
to tell
exciting
you.
for you.
That only came through a couple of days ago.
Congratulations.
So I'm really, really, really proud of that, because NWF is close to my heart, but it had to work worldwide. It had to work for everybody, and it was never to exclude the employer and just protect the employee. It's not about that. It's about everybody along the way saying, Miles, earphones, they didn't charge, they didn't do. It's written. It's in the structure. It's in your passport. It's there. It's not, well, I've really got a meeting in a minute. Miles, please check back in with me later on. Just do the filing now and come back in later on. We'll deal with that in the afternoon. No, because to say to you, Miles, come back to me this afternoon, I'm not dealing with now, I've got a meeting. She has to sign to say she did that.
Yeah.
Because there is no going forward. There is no her boss. There is no the company providing your adjustment. That cannot happen. And when it's looked upon, there's only one person whose signature is missing from that structure because they fobbed you off, to coin a phrase. When everybody in your scope as a person who needs adjustment is going to be held accountable, watch how quickly things change.
I think that's a great note to end on, Yolanda. And I really appreciate your perspective right here and allowing me to push back on you, because I define myself as a culture guy. I am not a compliance, not a legal expert, but I am a culture guy. And I know that from what I've experienced, so often there is a culture of fear. There's misunderstandings that so often get in the way of true disability inclusion. So I appreciate your perspective in adding structure to all of our workplaces. And I think too that something that will be of interest is in a couple of weeks, we're going to be having another guest come on talking about the gap, how there's a lot more structure within education and how many more
Yes.
people within the states have much more support, but then there's a certain gap that happens as soon as they graduate and actually go into the workforce, where there's a lot more ambiguity around this kind of thing. So stay tuned for that conversation coming up. But please join us next week, Fridays at 11:30. But real quick, where can people find you and NWAF, Yolanda?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, but the website with all the hubs, the governance hubs, all the white papers that have been produced, and I'm fortunate because I don't think there isn't one white paper that I've produced. You can download them on the website. If you haven't already downloaded them on LinkedIn, that hasn't been implemented.
All right. Well, and I'll
So
make sure
yeah,
to link all those in the companion article coming up in a couple of weeks here. But Yolanda, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to everybody who joined us live to join the conversation. Susan, Sienna, and Heather, special shout out to all y'all for coming on and dropping comments into the chat here. Again, this has been Miles from Peak Performers. Signing off, and join us next week, Fridays at 11:30 Central Standard Time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
I'll just drop the link in the chat.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, Yolanda. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.